So, in the last couple of years, there's been a surprising amount of discoveries in regards to TDEs, or tidal disruption events. The events involving some kind of a supermassive black hole and some kind of an unlucky star, a star that gets slowly shredded by the black hole, which ends up releasing a relatively large amount of energy and produces very specific emissions visible from very far away. And because of the advances in modern telescopes, more and more such events have been discovered in just the last 3 years, with a lot of surprising events discovered in just the last few months. And so, hello wonderful person, this is Anton. Let's talk about some updates about TDEs, talk about some of the more extreme events that were just discovered just over a week ago, and in essence talk about this very bizarre but very powerful event that, despite being just theoretical a couple of decades ago, has now been officially confirmed and discovered in a lot of different places. And in essence, they all seem to happen in a very similar way. Some kind of a star gets a little bit too close to some kind of a supermassive black hole, very often somewhere in the center of a galaxy, that then gets torn apart by gravitational forces and specifically the tidal disruption. And though individually these events are somewhat rare, with a typical galaxy potentially experiencing one every 100,000 years, because of the amount of galaxies around us and because we can actually see these events from very far away, pretty much every single year, at least 20 to even 30 such events are usually discovered somewhere out there in the rest of the universe. And this number is expected to go up quite dramatically once we have even newer telescopes, such as the still developing Vera Rubin Observatory. And so in the next 5 years, we might actually be detecting hundreds of these every single year. But even now, in just the last 2 years, so many unusual TDEs have already been discovered. For example, in May of 2024, researchers potentially discovered a star that might have experienced 2 partial disruptions approximately 710 days apart. Or basically it's a star that didn't actually get destroyed the first time, with the first observation being in 2022, and has now potentially approached the black hole second time, with the emissions visible in May of 2024. And so if this is the case, this particular star has to be orbiting in some really bizarre and unusual ways. Mostly because orbits around these types of black holes are usually very unpredictable and extremely different from what you usually expect around a much smaller star. At the same time, just a couple of years ago, the researchers also discovered what essentially seems to be an unusually bright TDE potentially visible from 8.5 billion light-years away from us. And though at first it wasn't actually clear why it was so powerful and why it was so bright, this event, now referred to as AT 2022 CMC, is now believed to be the result of what the scientists refer to as Doppler boosting. Or, in other words, the extremely powerful jet emitted during this event was basically pointed directly at us, which made this explosion appear much brighter than usual, essentially amplifying the signal by several times. And as a result, it produced the farthest TDE ever detected. But similar Doppler-boosted TDEs have been discovered before. As far as I know, this is actually the 4th found so far. But then within just a few months, scientists started to discover other record holders. For example, they actually found the closest TDE just to discover something even closer a few months later. The first one came from the galaxy known as NGC 3799, 160 million light-years away from us, and in this case it was even visible in optical light, or essentially visible with a typical telescope, which led to a lot of different follow-ups and a lot of additional observations. But then they found another one, 132 million light-years away from us, in a spiral galaxy known as NGC 7392, with the event producing extremely bright emissions visible for several months. And interestingly, this event was also extremely bright in the infrared light. And just like that, around the same time, 18 more similar events, or I guess these hidden events, were discovered in similar frequencies, and these events have been previously missed by other additional surveys. And that basically suggested that a lot of TDEs could only be visible in certain frequencies and not others. And now, extremely recently, scientists discovered yet another record holder. AT 2023 VTO seems to be the largest, or I guess the most massive star ever to have ever been destroyed anywhere. In essence, making this the brightest and technically the most powerful event discovered so far. An event that technically represents a missing link for a very important mystery we've discussed recently. And so here this event was potentially at least 10 times brighter than anything else before. So bright, as a matter of fact, that initially scientists believed that this was maybe a supernova. and so naturally they zoomed in on the galaxy just to see where it came from and if this was a supernova after all. But as you can see from this image, it appeared to be right in the middle of the galaxy, which would be extremely unusual for a supernova, but more importantly, possessed an extremely similar spectrum to a very typical tidal disruption event. Here's roughly how it compares to everything else. But there was a very unusual observation here. Despite the similarity in the way it progressed, its overall spectrum was just a little bit different from what was expected. Here it actually contained quite a lot of helium, which could have only come from a very specific type of a star. And so then, once the researchers figured out what kind of a star this was, based on the total energy released and based on the overall emissions, they realized that this was an extremely rare event. Here there was a star that's approximately 9 times the mass of the Sun, destroyed by a black hole at least 10 million solar masses. A star obviously containing a lot of helium, and a star that was already in the relatively late stages of its life. But this is actually kind of unexpected. These types of stars usually have a total lifespan of less than 10 million years, which would imply that the star would have to form extremely close to the black hole before essentially being ripped apart by it within just a few million years. And those similar phenomena have been discovered around the local Sagittarius A star supermassive black hole. Right now there's really no explanation to how exactly this star got there, but it potentially formed nearby from some kind of a primordial gas. But because here it also possessed a tremendous amount of mass, producing very bright, very powerful emissions, it also takes us just a little bit closer to figuring out a somewhat strange phenomenon known as ANT, ambiguous nuclear transients. We've actually discussed this phenomenon relatively recently in one of the videos in the description, but to date approximately 10 such events have been discovered, and they basically make no sense right now. They essentially involve some kind of a supermassive black hole becoming extremely bright in very specific frequencies for several years, and even produce emissions that are very unique and somewhat peculiar. But they don't seem to resemble anything specific, but in one of the recent papers, scientists did suggest that all of this could be a result of some kind of a really massive star colliding with a somewhat massive black hole. And so based on the observations from this discovery, comparison of this event with a typical ANT might help the scientists solve this mystery once and for all, because this could be some kind of a missing link, or could provide necessary data to reveal what these ANTs are. Right now though, these events are definitely super extreme and very, very unusual. I mean, one of them, the most famous one, Scary Barbie, we've discussed previously, seemed to have occurred in the middle of nowhere. First there was basically nothing, not even a galaxy, and then suddenly, for several years, there was this really bright, very powerful emission illuminating the night skies. And so by studying this particular TDE of a very massive star, we might have some conclusions in the next few years. But at least for now, that's pretty much all we have. Lots of mysteries, lots of exciting discoveries, and a lot of really, really powerful events discovered in just the last couple of years based on a lot of modern observations. But because these tidal disruption events are so interesting and also so rare, we'll definitely come back and talk more about this once there are some additional discoveries. On that note, check out the previous discoveries in the video in the description. Thank you for watching, subscribe, share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support the channel on Patreon by joining channel membership or by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt you can find in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.